The heavy metal door clicked shut behind him, sealing off the hum of the night and the soft glow of the security lights in the hallway. In here, the air was still and cool, smelling of old wood, lemon polish, and something else, the faint, sweet dust that seemed to rise from the red velvet seats. He flicked the switch, and the work lights over the stage buzzed to life, throwing everything else into deeper shadow. This was his space for the next 2 hours. Leo Walsh set his heavy janitor's bucket down with a soft thud. The mop handle clattered against it, a sharp sound in the quiet. He took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. Friday nights were the longest. The school, Oak Ridge Prep, was empty. The students with their bright backpacks and loud laughs were gone. The teachers with their tired, kind eyes had driven home. It was just him and the building now. He started in the aisles, his work boots making a soft, shuffling sound on the carpet. He picked up a forgotten water bottle, a crumpled program from the student recital that had happened earlier that evening. An evening of musical promise, it read. He smoothed the paper, looking at the list of names and pieces. Sonatas, etudes, concertos. He didn't read the music. He just felt the weight of the words. He dropped it into his black trash bag. It rustled like a sigh. His mind, as it always did when the silence settled, drifted to his daughter. Chloe would be asleep by now. Mrs. Garcia from next door was on the couch, probably watching her cooking shows, a loyal sentry for the $10 he paid her every Friday. He pictured Chloe in her bed, the one with the slightly chipped purple headboard they'd found at a thrift store. Her dark hair would be fanned out on the pillow, one hand tucked under her cheek. She slept so deeply, as if making up for the quiet carefulness of her waking hours. She was a watcher, his girl. She saw everything. He finished the aisles and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the stage. The polished floor gleamed under the lights. And there it sat, central to everything, a great, dark beast of polished wood and potential, the Steinway grand piano. Someone from the recital had left the lid open, its heavy prop stick holding it up like a giant waiting mouth. The keys, a perfect row of ivory and ebony, seemed to breathe in the low light that Leo stopped mopping. He just looked at it. A feeling twisted in his chest, a familiar old ache he usually kept locked away in a small, quiet room inside himself. It wasn't just want. It was a kind of homesickness. He hadn't touched a piano like this in over 11 years. Not since before Chloe, not since his life in the city. The practice rooms that smelled of dust and ambition, the feeling of his fingers flying, creating worlds out of sound. That life felt like it belonged to another person now. A younger, lighter person who didn't know the weight of love and worry that came with being someone's only everything, his own piano. At home was an upright, a sturdy, scarred thing he'd bought for $50 when Chloe turned 5 and her eyes had lit up at a cartoon, character playing music. He'd taught her first scales on it, but playing it for himself? To feel that old joy? It felt selfish, indulgent. The music on that piano was for her future, not his past. And when would he have time, between his day shifts at the warehouse, these night shifts here, making lunches, helping with homework, and just being there? The silence in their apartment was a different kind. It was a full silence, filled with her presence. His music would have been an intrusion. He shook his head, a physical motion to clear the thoughts. He was being silly. It was just a piece of furniture. A very expensive piece of furniture he had to dust. He walked over, pulling a clean, soft cloth from his belt. He began to wipe the deep, glossy wood of the lid, his reflection a blurred, tired-looking man in the surface. Finished with the outside, he leaned in to gently dust the strings inside the body of the piano. The golden harp of the soundboard glimmered. He remembered his old teacher's voice. "The sound lives in here, boy." Your job is just to let it out. His fingers, calloused from work and not from practice, hovered over the strings. He didn't pluck them. He stood up and looked at the keyboard. The stage lights were warm on his back. The empty auditorium, with its hundreds of shrouded seats, watched him. No one was here. No one would ever know. It was a secret space, a bubble in time. The fear, the what-ifs, the memory of who he used to be, it all pressed in. But so did the sheer magnetic pull of the instrument. Slowly, almost against his own will, he sat down on the polished bench. It was firm. He placed his hands on his knees, staring at the keys. They were so clean, so perfect. He felt a tremor in his fingers, a nervous energy. This was stupid. He was a 42-year-old janitor. He had grease under his nails from fixing the sink in the teacher's lounge earlier. But then he thought of Chloe's face that afternoon. She'd been trying to draw a horse for school, and it kept coming out wrong. Her frustration had been a quiet storm, her small shoulders hunched. He'd sat with her, not drawing, just being there until the storm passed. That was his life now. Holding space for the quiet storms. His right hand lifted. Just one note. That's all. He pressed down on middle C. The note bloomed in the silent hall, rich and round and profound. It wasn't like the tinny sound of their upright. This was a voice. It vibrated in the air, in the wood of the stage, in his bones. It hung there, beautiful and alone, until it faded into nothing. The silence after it was deeper, more expectant. His left hand found its place. His right hand curved, the old posture coming back like a ghost, inhabiting his muscles. He didn't decide to play a song. His fingers simply remembered a path. They began to move, slowly at first, picking out the first few notes of a simple melancholic scale. Then it shifted, flowing into the opening bars of something older, deeper. A Chopin nocturne. It was a piece of the night, full of wandering thoughts and unresolved longing. He wasn't playing it perfectly. His timing was off in places. A few notes fumbled. But that didn't matter. What came out wasn't just the notes on some old sheet music. It was the sound of aching muscles at the end of a double shift. It was the quiet pride of seeing a good grade on Chloe's math test. It was the loneliness of parent-teacher conferences where he was the only father in the room. It was the fierce, terrifying love that was the engine of his entire life. All of it poured into the music, through his clumsy, rediscovering fingers. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking. He wasn't planning the next chore, the next bill, the next meal. He was just feeling. And the piano was feeling with him, translating every emotion into a language more pure than words. The empty auditorium was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of a dream he'd thought was dead. And for these few, stolen minutes in the quiet dark, Leo Walsh wasn't just a janitor cleaning a stage. He was a man, whole and alive, speaking the only truth he had left in his soul. The music wasn't something he heard with his ears. It was something that moved through him like a current. It started in his chest, a tightness he hadn't even realized was there, and then it traveled down his arms, into his wrists, his fingers. The stiff, aching joints from a life of physical work became loose and fluid. The keys, which had seemed so imposing a moment ago, now felt familiar under his skin, like the shape of an old friend's hand. He wasn't thinking about Chopin, or nocturnes, or the correct fingering. His mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in a small, sunlit practice room at the conservatory, years ago. The air had been stuffy, thick with the smell of old paper and the sweat of 100 striving students. He could almost feel the weight of the hope he carried then, a solid, bright thing. He saw his younger self, fingers flying, believing that if he just worked hard enough, the music would be his ticket to a different kind of life. A life on stages like this one, but with the lights on and an audience waiting. The memory shifted. He saw the face of Chloe's mother, not as she was when she left, tired and unhappy, but as she was in the beginning, when she would sit on the floor of his tiny apartment and listen to him play for hours, her head resting against his knee. She'd called his music a beautiful storm. He hadn't played for her in a long time before she was gone, and then, clear as anything, he saw Chloe as a toddler. She had been fascinated by the piano, not by the sound, but by the movement. She would stare, utterly captivated, as his fingers danced. She'd reach out her own small, sticky hand and press a fist down on a cluster of keys, creating a loud, joyful crash. She'd giggle, the sound like bells. He'd laugh with her, and then play a silly, bouncy tune, and she would dance, her diapered bottom wiggling, her arms waving. The song he was playing now wrapped itself around these memories. The sad parts grew deeper, fuller with the loss of those old dreams and that old love. But then the melody would turn, finding a major key, and it became something else. It became the warmth of Chloe falling asleep on his chest. It became the quiet triumph of figuring out how to braid her hair so it didn't look lopsided. It became the simple, daily rhythm of their life together, the cereal bowls in the morning, the bedtime stories, the quiet solidarity of two people against the world. He was crying. He didn't realize it at first. It was just a wet heat on his cheeks. There was no sob, no hitch in his breath. The tears just fell, silent and steady, as his hands kept moving. They were tears of grief for the man he thought he'd be. But they were also tears of release, because he was finally speaking this unspeakable language again. The piano was taking all of it, the regret, the joy, the bone-deep tiredness, the boundless love, and turning it into something beautiful. It wasn't a sad sound. It was a true sound. And in its truth, there was a strange, powerful peace. He played the final, lingering notes. They faded slowly, dissolving into the quiet of the huge, dark room. For a long moment, he just sat there, his hands resting gently on the keys now, his head bowed. The echo of the music lived in the air around him, a ghost of the feeling. His heart was pounding, but it was a good, clean ache, like after a long run. He took a deep, shaky breath and finally opened his eyes. He wiped his cheeks with the back of his sleeve, a rough, practical motion. He felt incredibly light, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying for a decade. He also felt a little foolish. A grown man, crying alone in an empty school auditorium. But the feeling was overpowered by a glow, a secret warmth in the center of his being. He had done it. He had touched the old dream, and it hadn't broken. It had, instead, mended something in him he hadn't known was cracked. Now he stood up. His legs felt unsteady. He carefully closed the lid of the piano, the soft thud a final gentle period at the end of his secret sentence. He patted the smooth woods, a silent thank you. The rest of his work passed in a daze. He mopped the stage, the swish of the wet mop, a mundane rhythm compared to the symphony that had just filled the space. He wiped down the railings, emptied the backstage trash. But his mind was quiet. The usual whirl of worries, the rent, the car making that new noise, Chloe's upcoming dentist appointment, was still there, but it was softer, farther away. It was like the music had created a clear space inside his head. When he finally stepped out of the auditorium, locking the heavy door behind him, the hallway lights seemed too bright, too harsh. The real world felt flat and colorless compared to the rich, emotional world he had just been living in. He finished his rounds, his boots echoing with a new loneliness. The spell was broken. He was just the night janitor again. He clocked out, the digital punch sounding a dull beep. He walked to his old sedan, the one with the mismatched passenger door. The night air was cool on his face. As he drove through the sleeping streets toward home, the glow inside him began to fade, replaced by a creeping anxiety. What had that been? A moment of weakness? A silly lapse? It felt too big, too important to just be a secret. It felt like he had confessed his deepest self to an empty room, and now he had to go back to pretending he was just a simple man with a simple life. He pushed the key into the lock of his apartment door, trying to be quiet. The living room was dark, lit only by the blue glow of the silent television. Mrs. Garcia was asleep in the armchair, her head tilted back. He gently shook her shoulder. She woke with a start, smiling warmly at him. She was an angel, Mrs. Garcia whispered, gathering her things. "We read a book." She went right to sleep. He thanked her, paid her, and saw her to the door. As he locked it, the familiar silence of his own home wrapped around him. It was a good silence, a safe silence, but tonight it felt different. It felt, waiting dot, he tiptoed to Chloe's door and pushed it open a crack. The nightlight, shaped like a star, cast a soft yellow glow. She was asleep, just as he'd pictured her earlier. One hand was tucked under her cheek. He watched the steady rise and fall of her blankets, and then he saw it. On her bedside table, next to her glass of water, was a piece of paper. It was a drawing. From this distance, he could just make out the shapes. It was a crude but heartfelt picture of a man sitting at a big box with lines on it. Coming out of the box were a bunch of curly cues, like waves or clouds. And next to the man, a smaller figure with a big smile. At the top, in her careful looping handwriting, she had written, "My dad plays music." His breath caught in his throat. How? He stood frozen in the doorway, his heart hammering again, but for a completely different reason. She hadn't been at Mrs. Garcia's. She had been at the school. She must have been in his break room, waiting for him to finish, and she had followed him. She had seen him. She had heard him. The secret wasn't a secret anymore. And as he looked from his daughter's peaceful, sleeping face to the proud, swirling lines of her drawing, the last of the night's strange magic settled into him, not as a fleeting feeling, but as a solid, warm stone in the pit of his stomach. It was no longer just about him and the lost dream. It was about her and what she had seen. He had shown her a hidden part of himself, and she had not looked away. She had drawn it and called it hers. He quietly closed her door and walked into the living room. He didn't turn on the light. He just sat in the old armchair, in the dark, staring at nothing. The echo of the piano was gone from the air, but it was now a permanent echo in his life. Something had changed tonight. Something had begun. And as tired as he was, he knew, with a certainty that shook him, that he could never go back to the silence. Not now that she was listening. The weekend passed in a strange, quiet haze. The drawing stayed on Chloe's knitstand. Neither of them mentioned it. It was like they had made an unspoken agreement to walk carefully around this new, fragile thing that had appeared in their home. He made pancakes on Saturday morning, the usual routine. She set the table, the usual routine. But there was a new awareness in the air. He'd catch her looking at him, not with a question, but with a kind of quiet awe, like she'd discovered he had a superpower. He felt exposed and a little scared. The raw emotion he'd let out in the empty auditorium felt private, like opening a vein. Now his daughter had seen it. Had he seemed foolish to her? Weak? The memory of her drawing, with its joyful, swirling lines, told him no. But the doubt still itched at him that Monday arrived, dragging him back into the rhythm of his 2 jobs. The day shift at the warehouse was loud and physical, a blessing in a way, because it didn't leave room for thinking. He loaded boxes onto pallets, the forklifts beeping around him, his muscles falling into the familiar, mindless burn. That evening, He dropped Chloe at Mrs. Garcia's for a few hours before his night cleaning shift. "Be good," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I will," she said, but she held on to his hand for an extra second. "Dad?" she started, then stopped. She just shook her head and gave him a small smile before running inside. Oak Ridge Prep felt different when he arrived. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was the place where his secret had happened. The hallways seemed to whisper as he pushed his cart along. He cleaned classrooms, the cafeteria, the science labs, his ears half listening for any sound from the auditorium. He avoided it, saving it for last, like he always did, but now with a knot of nerves in his stomach. Finally, it was time. He stood before the heavy door, his key in hand. He took a deep breath and went in. The stage was dark, the piano a solemn shape in the shadows. Everything was exactly as he'd left it Friday night. For a wild second, he thought about sitting down again. The pull was still there, a magnetic force. But it felt different now. It wouldn't be a secret. It would be a confirmation. He wasn't ready for that. He was just the janitor. He got to work. He was halfway through mopping the front rows of seats when he heard the soft click of the auditorium door opening. He froze, mop in hand. A figure stood silhouetted against the light from the hallway dot. It was the music director. He knew her by sight. She was a tall, older woman with sharp glasses and gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was always dressed in black, moving through the school with a quiet, purposeful air. The students, he'd overheard, were a little afraid of her. They called her the maestro behind her back. He'd never spoken to her directly. His first thought was panic. Was she checking up on him? Had someone complained about his work? He stood up straight, wiping his hands on his pants. "Ma'am," he said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet space. "I'm just finishing up. I can come back later if—" "No," she said. Her voice was clear, not unkind, but firm. "Please continue." She didn't leave. Instead, she walked down the side aisle, her heels making soft, precise clicks on the floor. She stopped about 10 feet from him, not looking at him, but looking at the stage, at the piano. The silence stretched. He didn't know what to do. He went back to mopping, but his movements were stiff, self-conscious. "You play," she said finally. It wasn't a question. The mop handle slipped in his sweaty palm. His heart did a hard, painful thump against his ribs. He stopped, but didn't turn around. He stared at the wet trail on the floor. "I know, ma'am." "Not really. Not anymore." "I heard you," she said simply. "Friday night. I came back for a folder." The world seemed to tilt. So he hadn't been alone. The privacy, the sacredness of that moment was an illusion. She had been there, hiding in the dark, listening. A hot wave of shame washed over him, followed by a spark of anger. It felt like a violation. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tight. "I shouldn't have touched the instrument. It won't happen again. I was just—" It was out of line. He expected a reprimand, a warning about his job. Instead, she was quiet for another long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was softer, with a strange thickness to it. "What you played." "It was not about the notes," she said. He dared to glance at her. She was still looking at the stage, her profile sharp in the dim light. "My students, they play the notes. They play them very well. They have the technique. They have the expensive tutors. They play with their fingers." She paused, and now she turned her head to look directly at him. Her eyes behind the glasses were intense. "You played with your life." He had no words. He just stood there, holding the stupid mop. "You stopped," she said. "Why?" The directness of the question knocked the air out of him. He looked down at his hands, at the broken nails, at calluses from work that had nothing to do with music. Life happened, he said, and it was the simplest, truest answer he had. She nodded slowly, as if she understood completely. I have a student, she said, shifting the subject in a way that confused him. A senior. A brilliant technician. He has been preparing the Rachmaninoff for the spring gala for 6 months. He has a scholarship audition the following week. She let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh, but without humor. Today, he broke his wrist skateboarding. Oh, Leo said, because he didn't know what else to say. Oh, indeed, she replied. The gala is in 3 weeks. Parents have bought tickets. Donors are coming. It is the biggest event of the year for the music program. She took a step closer to him. I need a replacement. Someone who can carry a major piece. Someone who can feel an audience, not just play at them. A cold understanding began to creep over him. He shook his head, taking a step back, the mop bucket clattering behind him. No, oh no, ma'am. Absolutely not. You can play, she insisted. I was messing around. He said, his voice rising. It was rusty and full of mistakes. I'm not a performer. I empty trash cans. I mop floors. You are a musician, she said, and the words hit him like a physical blow. You have something my students spend years trying to fake. You have the story. I heard it. You heard a tired man making noise in an empty room, he said, desperation creeping in. It's not the same thing. I have a daughter. I have 2 jobs. I haven't performed for anyone since before she was born. I would fall apart up there. You wouldn't be alone up there, she said quietly. You'd have that story with you. The one you told the piano. That is what people need to hear. Not just perfect notes. He felt trapped. The spacious auditorium felt like it was closing in on him. This was a nightmare. This proper, formidable woman was asking him, a janitor, to perform at a fancy school gala. It was ludicrous. It was humiliating. I can't, he said, his final word. He turned away, picking up the mop, a clear signal that the conversation was over. His hands were trembling. She didn't move. He could feel her gaze on his back. Think about it, she said. Her tone was no longer pushing. It was just a statement. The piano will be here. The stage will be here. The chance, well, chances like this don't often come back for a second look. He heard her footsteps retreating up the aisle, the door opening and closing. The silence she left behind was roaring in his ears. He finished his work in a blind panic, his mind racing. He drove home on autopilot, the music director's words mixing with the memory of Chloe's drawing. When he walked into the apartment, it was late. Mrs. Garcia had put Chloe to bed in his own room because she'd fallen asleep on the couch. He paid the sitter and went to check on his daughter. She was curled up in the middle of his big bed, surrounded by his pillows. Her drawing was on his knit stand now. She must have moved it. He sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted to his very bones. He looked at her sleeping face, so peaceful and trusting. He thought about the fear, the sheer terror of sitting on that stage with hundreds of eyes on him. He thought about failing, about being laughed at, about the whispers. Asterisk, did you hear they got the janitor to play? How pathetic. Asterisk, he could lose this job. He could become a joke. Then he looked back at the drawing. The curly cues of music, the big smile on the small figure next to the piano man. My dad plays music. He put his head in his hands. The music director was wrong. It wasn't a chance. It was a trap. A beautiful, terrifying trap that could break what little peace he had managed to build. But as he sat there in the quiet dark, the echo of the nocturne, his nocturne, whispered back to him from memory. And he knew with a sinking, inevitable certainty that she was also right. Chances like this didn't come back. And now that the question had been asked, no matter what he decided, the silence of his old life was gone forever. The week that followed was the longest of his life. It was like carrying a live wire in his chest. Every sound was too sharp. Every task felt trivial. He moved through his days at the warehouse and his nights at the school in a fog of dread and a strange, flickering hope he tried desperately to snuff out. He avoided the music director. When he saw her in the hallways, he'd turn a corner or look down at his cart. She didn't seek him out. She had made her offer. The ball, as they say, was in his court. He hated that ball. The piano in the auditorium became a monument to his indecision. He cleaned around it with a sort of reverence, but he couldn't bring himself to touch the keys. To play now would feel like he was practicing, and practicing meant he was considering it, and considering it felt like stepping toward the edge of a very high cliff. Chloe knew something was wrong. Kids always know. She watched him with those big, seeing eyes. He was quieter than usual, lost in thoughts that made him frown at his soup. One evening, as he was fixing a loose hinge on her bedroom door, she came and sat on the floor next to his toolbox. "You're thinking about the music, aren't you?" she asked, her voice small in the quiet room. The screwdriver slipped, scraping his knuckle. He sucked in a breath. "What makes you say that?" "You get the same look on your face," she said simply, drawing her knees up to her chin. "The one you had when you were looking at the piano before you played. Like you're seeing something far away." He put the tools down and sat beside her, his back against the wall. The honesty of children was a brutal, beautiful thing. There was no point lying. "The music teacher at school. She heard me play. She wants me to play at a big concert they have." Chloe's eyes widened, not with surprise, but with pure, undiluted excitement. It was like someone had lit a candle inside her. "You're going to do it." "No," he said quickly, the word coming out harsher than he meant. He softened his voice. "No, sweetheart. It's not for people like me. It's for the students. It's a fancy thing. With people in suits and dresses. I'd be out of place." The light in her eyes dimmed. She looked down at her socks, picking at a loose thread. "But you're the best piano player." He almost laughed, a sad, choked sound. "I'm really not. I was just letting off steam." "It didn't sound like steam," she said, her voice firm with a child's conviction. "It sounded like the story you read me. The one with the sad knight who finds the hidden garden." It was sad, but then it was happy. It was both. Her words stole the air from his lungs. She had understood it. More than any critic, more than any teacher, his 10-year-old daughter had heard exactly what was in his heart. The night, the garden. It was an old book they'd read together a dozen times. "If you did it," she continued, still not looking at him, her voice now barely a whisper, "I could tell everyone. I could say, 'That's my dad,' and they would all see." And there it was. The core of it. Not his pride, not his dead dream. Hers, her pride in him. The thing he worked every single day to earn, to be worthy of. She was offering him a chance to be the kind of dad who did brave, amazing things. Not just the kind of dad who fixed hinges and made sure there was milk for cereal. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. She smelled like crayons and the strawberry shampoo he bought for her. He didn't say anything. He just held her, feeling the weight of her hope settle onto his shoulders. Heavier than any box at the warehouse. The next day was Friday. His cleaning night. He walked into the auditorium, and this time he didn't just look at the piano. He walked right up to it. He thought about Chloe's face, the dimmed light in her eyes when he'd said no. He thought about her drawing, now taped to the refrigerator. He thought about the music director's words. You played with your life. He was so tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of shrinking his world to fit what he thought was possible. Most of all, he was tired of telling his daughter, without using words, that her father's dreams were too small to see the light of day. He didn't play. Instead, he took out his phone, an old model with a cracked screen. He scrolled until he found the number for the school's main office, which he'd saved once to call in sick. From there, he managed to get the extension for the music department. His finger hovered over the call button. His mouth was dry. This was the point of no return. If he did this, there was no backing out gracefully. He would be committed. He would have to face it. He thought of Chloe saying, asterisk, they would all see. Asterisk, he pressed call. It rang 3 times. Music office. It was her voice. For a second, he couldn't speak. Hello? She said again, a hint of impatience in her tone. It's the janitor, he blurted out, instantly feeling stupid. There was a pause on the other end. Then her voice changed, becoming alert, focused. Yes, He swallowed, closing his eyes. About the gala. If the offer. Is it still? It is, she said, cutting through his fumbling. It is still available. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The words felt like stones he had to lift and throw. I'll do it. The silence on the line was total. He wondered if she'd hung up. Then she said, good. There was no celebration in her voice, no surprise. It was the tone of a general who had just received the report they expected. Rehearsals are in this hall, Monday and Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock. Be here this Monday. We will select your piece. But I thought I already played something, he said, confused. What you played was a diary entry, she said. For the gala, you need a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. We will find it. And one more thing. Yes, you will need to wear a suit. And with that, she hung up. He stood there in the empty auditorium, the dead phone in his hand. He had done it. A wave of immediate, gut-churning nausea washed over him. What had he just done? He leaned against the piano for support, the cool, smooth wood the only solid thing in his spinning world. The following Monday night, he felt like a ghost walking into his own workplace. The school was supposed to be empty, but the auditorium was alive with light and sound. A few students were on stage, chatting, holding violins and flutes. They fell silent as he walked in, still in his janitor's uniform. He saw the look's curiosity, confusion. He knew what they saw. The cleaning man lost. The music director was at the front, scribbling on a clipboard. She looked up, nodded at him as if his presence was the most normal thing in the world. You're here, sit. She pointed to the piano bench. Feeling like every eye was drilling into his back, he walked up the steps and sat. The stage lights were hot. It was completely different from the cool, private dark of his midnight visit. Play the Chopin, she commanded. Standing beside the piano. His fingers were ice. He laid them on the keys, but they felt foreign. He started, and it was a disaster. The notes were clumsy, halting. The emotion that had flowed so freely was locked up tight under the pressure of being watched. He stumbled through a page and then just stopped, his hands falling into his lap. I can't, he muttered. The students were whispering. His face burned. The music director didn't scold him. She turned to the small group. Everyone, take a 15-minute break. Go get some air. They filed out, casting backward glances. When they were gone, she pulled a chair close to the piano and sat down. Look at me, she said. He forced himself to meet her gaze. They are not your audience. Your daughter is your audience. Play it for her. Right now. Pretend she is sitting right there in the front row. He looked out at the sea of empty red seats. In his mind, he put Chloe in the center of the front row, in her favorite blue dress, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. He took another breath, deeper this time. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he looked at that spot in the front row. He began again. It wasn't perfect. But the feeling came back, trickling in like water through a crack in a dam. It was shakier, but it was there. He played the whole piece. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said again. That same simple word. The nocturne is your heart. But for the gala, we need more. We need your spine, too. You will learn something new, something that requires work. It will give you something to focus on besides your fear. She placed a new sheet of music on the stand. It was a piece by a composer he didn't know. It looked complex, beautiful, with sweeping arcs and dramatic pauses. "This," she said, tapping the page. "It has loneliness in it and a great, rising hope. You will understand it. We have 3 weeks. You will be here every Monday and Wednesday, and you will practice wherever you can." He looked at the dense forest of notes, a fresh terror rising. But underneath it, for the first time, there was a tiny, stubborn spark. A challenge. Not just to survive, but to grow. He nodded, unable to speak. "Good," she said for the 3rd time, and almost smiled. It was a small, sharp thing, but it was real. Now, from the beginning. And remember who you're playing for. She gestured to the empty front row. He turned back to the piano, to the daunting new music. He found Chloe's spot with his eyes. And he began. The 3 weeks were a blur of a new, exhausting rhythm. His life became a sandwich of tension, with his jobs as the bread and the music as the overwhelming filling. He practiced on the school piano during his lunch breaks at the warehouse, sneaking into a practice room with his head down. He taped photocopied sections of the sheet music to the wall above their apartment's upright, his fingers stumbling through the complex passages late into the night. A pillow stuffed under the strings to mute the sound for the neighbors. Chloe became his anchor. She'd sit on the couch with her homework, a silent, steady presence. Sometimes, when he'd get frustrated, hitting a wrong note for the 10th time, she'd say, "It's okay. Dad, just play the happy part again." She couldn't read music, but she could hear the feeling. She was his first and most important audience. The rehearsals at school were the hardest. The other students, the real musicians, grew used to him. Their initial confusion turned into a distant, polite acceptance. They were kind, in their way, but he was from a different planet. They talked about college auditions and master classes. He worried about his shift schedule, and if Chloe had enough socks. The music director was a relentless taskmaster. She drilled him on technique, on dynamics, on the story of the piece. "It is not about being sad," she'd say. "It is about having been sad, and now looking at the sky. Show me the sky in that phrase." He found the sky sometimes. In moments when he was alone, or when he thought of Chloe's face, the music would lift. And for a few bars, he wasn't a janitor learning a party trick. He was a man speaking a powerful, wordless truth. The day of the gala dawned gray and drizzly. A steady, nervous rain. It felt appropriate. The knot in his stomach had been growing for days, and now it was a solid, living thing, twisting inside him. He'd picked up the rented suit the evening before. It hung in his closet, dark and alien, next to his work uniforms and worn-out jeans. He tried to eat breakfast. The eggs tasted like cardboard. Chloe, however, was buzzing. She had laid out her best dress, a blue one with a white collar, hours before they needed to leave. "Do you think people will clap a lot?" she asked, spreading jam on her toast. "I think they'll clap for everyone," he said, avoiding the real question. At school, That afternoon for his pre-event cleaning, the building was transformed. Flowers stood in the entrance hall. A glossy banner read Spring Gala. The quiet temple of learning was now a venue. He did his work quickly, avoiding the auditorium, which buzzed with the sounds of the student orchestra doing a sound check. The music director found him, emptying trash bins in a science lab. She looked him up and down, taking in his pale face, the tension in his shoulders. "Nervous is good," she stated. "It means you care. Remember the sky. Remember your front row." She didn't wait for a reply, just turned and walked away, her heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm down the polished floor. Evening came. He stood in his tiny bathroom, trying to tie the tie. His fingers, which could find complex chords in the dark, were useless against the slim strip of silk. He yanked it off, his breath coming in short gasps. He was going to be sick. This was a colossal mistake. He would walk out there and freeze. He would humiliate himself, humiliate Chloe. A small knock came at the door. "Dad?" Chloe's voice muffled. He opened it. She was in her blue dress, her hair neatly braided. She looked so grown up and so small. She saw the tie in his hand, his panicked face. "I can't do this, sweetheart," he whispered, the confession tearing out of him. She didn't say anything. She took the tie from his limp hand. "Turn around," she said. He obeyed, facing the mirror. He watched her in the reflection as she stood on the closed toilet lid. Her small, serious face was set in concentration. Her tongue poked out the corner of her mouth as she looped and pulled the fabric with a surprising deftness. She had learned from a video, he realized. She had known he would need help. She finished patting the knot. It wasn't perfect, but it was a tie. She rested her chin on his shoulder, her cheek against his, looking at their reflection together. The man in the stiff suit, the girl in the blue dress. "You just have to play our song," she said softly, her voice right by his ear. "That's all. Just play ours." He closed his eyes, leaning into her for a second. Our song. Not Chopin's, not the new composer's. Theirs, the one from the story. The sad night and the hidden garden. He drove to the school in a silence that felt holy. Chloe held his hand the whole way, her small, cool palm against his sweaty one. Backstage was controlled chaos. Students in black and white tuned instruments, whispered lines, fluttered with last-minute nerves. He felt invisible in his suit, a ghost among the living. His name was on the program, third to last. Leo Walsh, guest performer. It looked like a typo. He found a dark corner behind a heavy velvet curtain and just breathed. He could hear the muffled sounds of the audience settling in, the rustle of programs, the low hum of conversation. Hundreds of people. Parents, teachers, donors. People who expected polish and perfection. The music director appeared at his side like a shadow. "It is time. You are on after the woodwind quartet." He just nodded, unable to speak. The quartet played. The music was light, cheerful, and precise. The applause was warm. Then the announcer's voice came over the speaker. "And now, a special addition to our program. Please welcome our guest performer, Leo Walsh." There was a polite, curious patter of applause. He walked out from the wings. The stage lights were a physical force, hot and blinding. He could see nothing beyond the edge of the stage, just a vast, dark void where the sound of clapping lived. His legs carried him to the piano on pure muscle memory. The grand piano gleamed, a beast waiting. He sat. The bench was firm. The silence of the audience was immense, a living thing waiting to be fed. His mind went blank. The first note of the new piece, the one he practiced for 100 hours, vanished from his memory. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through his veins. This was it. The failure he had feared. Then, from the front row of the dark void, a small, determined hand went up. It was a wave. Then two hands waving just above head level. He couldn't see her face, but he knew. It was her, Chloe, saying, "Asterisk, I'm here. I see you." Asterisk, the world snapped into focus. The dark void wasn't an audience of critics. It was just a room. And in the front row was his daughter. He didn't play the new piece. His hands, of their own accord, found the beginning of the Chopin Nocturne. The first, familiar, aching notes rang out into the hush. This time, it was different from the empty auditorium. The emotion wasn't a private release. It was a gift. He played the loneliness of late nights and missed chances. But then, woven into the melody, he played the warm weight of a sleeping child on his chest. He played the frustration of broken things and the triumph of fixing them. He played the quiet joy of a shared bowl of popcorn on the couch, the fear of not being enough, and the solid, unwavering love that was the answer to that fear. He played their story, the sad night, the hidden garden, the finding of it. Together. He forgot about technique. He forgot about the audience. He played for the waving hands in the front row. The music swelled and fell, a river of sound carrying all of it, the past, the present, the hope for the future. As the final resonant chord faded, the silence returned. It was deeper this time, thick with something that wasn't just quiet. It was the silence of a held breath. Then, from the front row, a single clear sound broke it. Not clapping. A voice. His daughter's voice, loud and proud and bursting with joy. "That's my dad." It was like a dam breaking. The applause didn't start as a patter. It erupted. A wave of sound, warm and roaring, filling the auditorium. People rose to their feet. He could see them now, their faces blurred by the lights and his own tears. They were standing. For him. He stood up on shaky legs, his vision swimming. He looked to the front row. Chloe was bouncing on her feet, clapping so hard her braids swung, her face a beacon of pure, radiant pride. He put a hand over his heart, a small, shaky gesture, and bowed his head, first to her and then to the room. As he walked off the stage. The sound still washing over him, the music director was there in the wings. She didn't say good. She just looked at him, her sharp eyes bright, and gave a single firm nod. It was all that was needed. Later, after all the performances, people milled around in the entrance hall, drinking punch. A few people he didn't know came up to him, shook his hand, their eyes soft. "Thank you," one woman said, her own eyes glistening. That was human, but he only had eyes for one person. He found Chloe by the punch bowl, talking animatedly with two other girls from her class. She saw him and broke away, running to him. He caught her in a hug, lifting her off the ground. His suit jacket be damned. "You did it?" she whispered into his ear. Squeezing his neck tightly. "We did it," he whispered back. He carried her out of the bright lights and the noise, back into the quiet, familiar hallway that led to the janitor's closet. His other workplace. His other life. But it didn't feel like a smaller life anymore. It felt like the foundation. The music wasn't a separate thing, a ghost from the past. It was part of the foundation now, too. It was the story their foundation could tell. He set her down, took her hand. They walked toward the exit, the echoes of the applause finally fading, replaced by the comfortable, shared silence between them. He was still a dad. He was still a janitor. But now, he